It's time for another edition, so important after last Tuesday, of Court Accountability Action Meets Legal AF. As I said on a recent hot take, there's a glass that needs to be broken in times of an emergency. And we at Court Accountability Action and Legal AF are behind that glass. We didn't build our respective channels and organizations just to try to get Joe Biden and Kamala Harris elected. No, we have more durable ideals than that, to be here in case something happened like this on the other side of Tuesday, and to start the planning immediately in order to fix what happened. So we're going to talk a bit here about a survey, a 5,000-foot survey of what just happened, the role of the courts, and the importance of independent media, journalism, organizations, public interest groups going forward to fight off the trolls, foreign and domestic, that took over social media and news media and helped change the hearts and minds of people against the Democratic agenda. And talk about the federal courts, all important federal courts, even more so now. 81% of the federal judges were not appointed by somebody named Donald Trump. You wouldn't know that from how many times they kept hitting the Trumpers to get their agenda through, but that's the case. And now Joe Biden, I feel, has one job to do in the remaining waning days, on a domestic front at least, and that is to get the rest of his federal judges through, including the one at the First Circuit, because every one he doesn't fill is one more we're handing over to the other side to change completely the face of our federal judiciary. I'm joined by Lisa Graves and by Alex Aronson. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hey, Popok, it's great to be with you.
All right. That was got a lot of responsibility on our shoulders now. All right. So who wants to kick it off and move us forward about what happened a week from today?
You want to go
I'm
first,
happy
Alex?
to. Yeah, sure. Oh boy, wow, what a week it's been. Well, we're a week out from the election as we're taping this, and it's given us a lot of time to process and digest, what happened, what the implications are for our future. And we, of course, with our focus on the courts and on the long running special interest campaign to capture and weaponize the courts, are thinking about, the court's role in all of this. I think one thing that's happened is that as we've sort of surveyed this wreckage and we've seen the recriminations and blame spread around, a really underappreciated dynamic is the extent to which Trump's election, despite having won the popular vote, giving his, what I think we all agree is an authoritarian takeover, an air of democratic legitimacy, is very much and very directly the product of the weaponization and capture of the court, both this past year, where at every turn, the Supreme Court's supermajority tipped the scales to help Trump avoid accountability, to help him retake power, but also going back decades, right? I think one thing that really emerged in the last month or so of the campaign was the extent to which our politics, our democracy, has now been overrun and taken over by billionaire oligarchs. And Elon Musk, of course, stands apart now with his huge play on Trump, which has already, increased his fortune by incredible sums. But all of this, the flood of money into our politics, the rejiggering of House districts through partisan gerrymandering, which looks to be likely to decide the winner of the House. It's likely to put the House in Republican hands by virtue of just a few states' Republican gerrymanders. Structurally have laid the foundations for this authoritarian takeover, and I think that ties to how we should expect things to go. We have talked a lot on this show about the extent to which the court's justices, the majority justices, were put in place by the very same interests, oligarchs, billionaires, theocrats, who are behind Project 2025. And to a certain extent, we think the lessons learned from the first Trump administration, where in certain circumstances, mostly on procedural and administrative challenges, the courts did provide a check to Trump. We're much less bullish on the prospect that the court will stand up against him, given the alignment of their agenda and given the warning signs that we've seen in cases like Trump versus United States, where in very real ways this court majority has set Trump up to be a monarchical executive.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say it's nice to see you both after this long week. This long week, I was saying, feels like dog years, like a year of time and worry and shock in response to what happened last week. But I also think that this question of trying to have a perspective on where we are, as you were pointing out, Alex, and as we've talked about, this election is really substantially a product of this court's intervention. What would have happened if Donald Trump had been facing the trial that he was indicted for the crimes around January 6th, where there was round the clock sort of coverage by the press of the witnesses about his effort to subvert American democracy, about the effects of that on January 6th, the attack on the Capitol, the lives lost, the machinations he went to deny reality. If that trial had proceeded this summer with the coverage that it would have garnered, and legitimate coverage, not in a political sense, but like just the legitimate bringing to justice of Donald Trump, that could have changed part of the conversation in America. It wouldn't have changed all the minds. It wouldn't have had that effect. But as you point out, at every point this year, when John Roberts and the three justices that Donald Trump installed on the Supreme Court, two of whom were certainly there illegitimately in terms of the timing, and one of whom should never have been confirmed based on his track record of sexual assault, in my opinion. But those three Trump justices joined with the other Republican appointees to basically try to hand Donald Trump the presidency, and they succeeded. They, unlike the other courts, which actually were holding him accountable, moving forward with legitimate charges that were based on solid evidence, the Trump judges, whenever they had the chance, tried to help him. And so, as we talked about, I think last time with Michael Potterser and more, how this was a sort of constitutional coup, but in some ways we couldn't quite see it at the time because we were still trying to sort of fight our way through to getting to justice. But when you draw the lens back, as he said, in any other country, if you had the judges of the president's party all weighing in to protect him from accountability for his crimes on the eve of an election, you would call that an illegitimate result. You would call it a constitutional or judicial coup.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. We are, for those that are just tuning in, we are going to talk about how to try to make Donald Trump as quickly a lame duck president as possible. The good news is we're not looking at 2 terms of Donald Trump off this election. We are uniquely looking at 1 term. And really, if there can be a crushing blow landed on him for the midterms, he's got 2 years. Now he can do tremendous amount of damage in 2 years, but we can limit it because we know we're now drunk with power. We could already see Donald Trump's worst, darkest instincts being enabled by the people around him, like Susie Wiles, who's basically become a co-president. They're going to try to use executive orders for everything that go beyond congressional law, which means opportunities to go into court to challenge the executive orders, much the way we just saw them successfully do against many of Joe Biden's policies. Their strategy is executive law oriented. They've already said out loud that they're not going to try to tie themselves up with actual legislation, an actual bill being passed into law through MAGA Congress with a slim lead in the House. They're going to bypass all that with a raft of executive orders that have all been drafted already. He's going to get writer's cramp on day one because there's hundreds of executive orders, I'm sure, that have already been done, along with the pardons that he's going to do that could number into the couple of thousand to cover everybody related to Jan 6th and in MAGA Congress. And so we have to be ready as a group that's focused on the court system and the federal judges to fly spec every executive order. And some of them are going to make our heads pop off and our hair light on fire. There's already one before we started recording today that the Wall Street Journal and other outlets are reporting that they already have an executive order ready to get rid of all the woke generals in the military, including the current joint chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, because he's too woke for them. So here we go. Fascism dictator 101. Get rid of all the generals that are against you, which means, again, America is less secure and has no checks and balances against this kind of president. So let's talk about what we can do with the federal courts in terms of making sure that we limit the damage of how many judges that he can appoint, what the Senate can do in the remaining waning days, and how they oppose the obvious strategies of delay by the other party. And then we can talk about sort of these executive orders and what's the best route to challenge them.
Popok, I'm glad you framed it that way, in terms of limiting the damage, because I think, that's what we're looking at in terms of the actual cases we'll be bringing to court. I think it's essential to recognize the fundamental difference between the way this court, as currently composed, will review those challenges to Trump's Project 2025 agenda versus the way it's handled challenges to Biden's executive branch actions. Because they're going to be there for a lot more of it, right? And so to the extent we're looking to the courts to save us here, I don't think it's going to be the way. We obviously need to be doing exactly what you described, right? Fly specking each of those executive orders, supporting and amplifying the talented litigators who will be challenging that stuff in court. But at the end of the day, we think we're going to continue to need investment and energy around popular movement building to push our elected leaders and to find new elected leaders who will wield power to confront these corrupt justices. Because otherwise, we face this danger of sort of like, hoping that these courts will save us, knowing that they likely will not, and then allowing them to, without the scrutiny, without their feet to the fire, to continue their long-term agenda, which is not narrowly focused on helping Trump advance his agenda, but on advancing the interests of the oligarchs and theocrats who put them there. And so that's how we're going to be framing our work and thinking about our work over the next years. And you're right, there's some really incredibly important opportunities right now with dozens of vacancies still pending. Of course, Republicans in 2016 had kept over 100 vacancies, from Obama, that preventing Obama from filling those vacancies, so that Trump could then, immediately start ushering extremists into those vacancies. There are thankfully fewer now, but it's of paramount importance that the Senate prioritize this. I think it could be a rocky road. Folks like Manchin and Sinema might not be there for it, and there's going to need to be popular pressure. Folks, who are engaged on this stuff. This is like the way to make durable, lasting change. You're right. Every single one of these vacancies is just sort of, that's not filled, is leaving it for the next alien candidate.
Are you confident, both of you, that the people in the Senate, some of which one of you used to work for, are up to the task? They know the procedure. They know how to do this. They know the parliamentary rules in order to shove this through, or should I want to manage expectations here? I guess the question is, are we going to get these openings filled in time in the remaining 70 days or not?
I think it's an open question, and one that's going to depend a lot on whether the people can make their voices heard and exert pressure on Senate leadership to make this a priority. There's some other important Senate priorities coming up. Obviously the omnibus appropriations bill that needs to be passed. The National Defense Authorization Act is still on the table. And I think Chuck Schumer, as the leader of the Senate Democrats, has a fairly tall task in making sure he's got his entire caucus, because we've already seen folks like Elon Musk leaning in to demand that no remaining judges be confirmed. And it's far from clear, to me at least, that the very narrow Democratic majority in the Senate will hold to get these guys over the line. I don't think it's a matter of procedural rules or anything like that. I think it's a matter of political will and putting the fight forward.
Well, and to your point,
point,
maybe this release can come in. Why don't you comment also on that, and Lisa, also on this push, which for me sounds more and more like a Trojan horse being pushed by the Republicans, that we somehow take Sotomayor out and try to replace her. That sounds like based on how Alex just described the process, that sounds like a disaster that we should not invite.
Yeah, I mean, it'd only take one or two people to not to break faith to basically hand that seat then directly to Trump upon arrival.
Yeah.
I think when you see the landscape that's unfolding, with the um, Elon Musk and Trump's approach to nominations or to appointments, it's really extraordinary. It's almost like they just want to have sort of a Vichy Senate because they don't really want them. They just want to have like the appearance of this Senate that
Oh, yeah.
is, beholden to him. But in fact, he has no intention of anyone who's controversial having to be confirmed by the Senate, which is one of the key checks in our, constitutional system of, you don't get to have a position of power unless you're confirmed to that position by the other branch. Even having that other branch at his disposal, he's inclined to put people through who they might not even be willing to confirm due to financial conflicts, graft, corruption, manifest unfitness, killing puppies. Like there's a whole array of
Well,
things that
it'll just be
qualify
everybody's
someone.
going to go. Everybody's obituary is going to say in that group that they were once the acting
Yeah,
Homeland Security Director, the acting Attorney General, an acting federal judge, by the way. That's
yeah,
allowed. And
yeah.
for 2 years, for 2 full years. And here's the question for you, Supreme Court scholars. Supreme Courts, they got posters in their bedroom, all the MAGA right wing, that talks about separation of powers. Okay. So can a Senate bend over for its cult leader, abdicate its responsibilities to hold confirmation hearings and to confirm these picks, their Article 1 powers, right, by having a phony recess that lasts 10 days or more right at the beginning, where they don't do the people's business, and that's going to be okay with the MAGA Supreme Court?
Well, it's a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge in the sense of the courts, even if the court were inclined, the court in essence doesn't have the power to convene Congress. So that's a fundamental challenge.
Yeah, no,
But
but people are going
I,
to sue over it. People are going to sue. The Democrats are going to
right,
sue that the appointment is invalid. The recess appointment is invalid because, and we're back with the 3-day rule under Obama with the NLRB and the 10-day
right,
rule that
right,
developed.
right.
Right. So when no, I agree. The only one that can call Congress back is Congress and the president. But
Yeah. Yeah, but it is a challenge because there there are legitimate recess appointment precedents, but this is a whole new thing. This is basically taking a process that was designed for very temporary short-term needs to make sure that there is someone in a cabinet post who can make decisions, and then basically turning it on his head and saying in essence, we'll appoint someone, they'll be acting, and then you can either confirm someone or not. We don't care. We'll just appoint another acting
right,
person and
continue
basically
for 2 years.
circumvent the whole check on the process, even with the Senate in the hands of the Republicans. I think what that shows or signals, and signals is too light of a term, it basically forecasts real, even greater extremism in terms of who is put into those positions, people who are unworthy, unfit for those positions of power, and who are highly likely to, I think, abuse those powers. And that's where we're going to have to really have greater unity, greater response and fight back to respond to the chaos that Trump is about to unleash.
No, it's interesting. Yeah, it's also it strikes me that we also have evidence here that this is like straight up pretextual, almost self-announced effort to exploit the recess appointments powers, right? And I think that raises questions about whether the court would be willing to move past principles like it's announced in other contexts around sort of like default presumptions of good faith, to recognize that this was an illegitimate attempt to circumvent constitutional requirements of advice and consent. But I'm not holding my breath for this court to be much of a bulwark on Trump's executive actions, and I think this will be a matter for ripe fight and debate, and could be an important early indicator of where things are heading.
But I agree with you, and I agree with Lisa. Look, the Trump whisperer here is Susie Wiles. We'll talk about her in the future. Susie
Yeah,
Wiles. The only
yeah,
thing that seems to be appealing about her is that she's Pat Summerall's daughter, which I didn't realize until recently, of NFL fame. But other than that, she came up through the rough and tumble of Florida politics. Her
yeah.
bosses were Rick Scott, who's going to be the Senate Majority Leader. I don't care what Cornyn and Thune thinks is going to happen. He's going to be the Senate Majority Leader because Musk and Susie Wiles want him to be.
Yeah.
And combined with her other boss of watching Ron DeSantis, that's exactly the model for how he's going to treat the Senate and maybe the House, is exactly the way DeSantis has treated the Florida legislature, which is they've never opposed him. They anything that comes out of his fevered imagination in law, they sign and they rubber stamp. And that's what Donald Trump wants. And this Supreme Court, just to look back for a minute, is wholly to blame because they levitated the presidency and Donald Trump in particular above the other branches. There's no co-equal branches of government anymore. It's an imperial unitary president and the other two are lapdogs for him.
Yeah. Popok, just to jump in, I think what this, gets me to is I think what's a really necessary change of mentality for Senate Democrats as they enter this opposition era in a second Trump administration. Particularly around the courts and judicial appointments, and even political appointments too. I think, but in the context of the courts, where Senate procedures like the blue slip, exist or existed. Which is a mechanism by which senators still at the district court level are given an opportunity to provide advice or ultimately to veto even a president of the other party's selection for their seat. What we saw during the first Trump administration was a real effort by Democrats to accommodate the Trump administration and Senate Republicans who held the reins during those years in trying to select these nominees. I think it was misguided, right? The Senate Republicans pretty immediately got rid of the circuit court blue slip, taking away that Democratic veto over blue state very important circuit court appointments. They maintained the district court blue slip, and we and other advocates during the Biden administration pushed for the Senate Democrats to get rid of the district court blue slip, because I think we expected and still expect that if the blue slips pose an impediment to confirmation of MAGA judges in this next administration, that Republicans will just get rid of it. And so I think we ended up with far too many inadequate, really bad judges during the Trump years, and not as much progress on judicial confirmations during the Biden years as we could have. And so I hope that and we will work to ensure that Senate Democrats speak plainly about what's happening with this judicial takeover and are much more vocal and cohesive and strong backboned about their opposition this time around.
Yeah, we really need strong opposition leaders in Congress in every key post, and not people who are just going to try to pretend like this is a bipartisan normal environment. This is not a normal environment. It's a genuinely extreme environment. So I definitely concur with my dear friend and colleague, Alex.
Yeah, no, this is we're on a battlefield and we have to stand opposed, and that's I'm hoping Hakeem Jeffries and some new guard in the House, maybe guided by the old guard with Nancy Pelosi on one side, Chuck Schumer on the other, can be an effective opposition party. As I said in the first couple of days after the election, we're not in exile; we're in opposition, and that's an active. There's an active role to be played to try to pinned Donald Trump down just as they did. I told people, and I'll say it again, over 1,000 cases were filed in the 2016-2020 period by political action groups, by public interest groups, by NGOs, by the Democratic Party, and by attorney generals, by states against Donald Trump and his policies. And they were by and large effective. The attorney generals were effective about 80% of the time in the cases they brought. Now, I know that the federal judge landscape has changed a bit, but still 81% of the judges don't have a Trump, they aren't beholden to Trump. We just have to pick out those judges and those circuits and go in that direction and make it as hard as we can for the United States Supreme Court, right?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have lots of lower court judges who will do the right thing when these challenges get brought. We need to make sure that they write, bold, strong dissents. Drive these ideas forward around kind of what the proper judicial function is, and let's make the justices pay a price when they, strike these rulings down on sort of plainly unprincipled, partisan, decision making.
Yeah,
Lisa
and I'd also
Gray,
like to
sorry,
I
sorry, Lisa.
I was gonna say, I'd also like to see the sort of just genuine sand in the gears of slowly and deliberately considering these matters and not accepting, demands to expedite in a way that tees it up for the court, just like taking their time. take some time.
Yep. Lisa Graves and Alex Aronson, Court Accountability Action, True North, and Michael Popok here for Legal AF. We're going to get back on the horse. We're going to do this on a regular basis. You got a great playlist already here for Court Accountability Action. Over 32,000 people have found their way to Legal AF since Tuesday.
Wow.
I thank from the bottom of my heart and our heart, every one of them for being here. Now is the time. We need you the most now. We need to lean forward, not back. And the hand-wringing, frankly, phase is now over. It's a week.
Yeah.
And now it's how we oppose the plans and we become participants. This is a participatory democracy, a contact sport. You can't do it from your couch or even from watching YouTube. And we'll try to leave each of these episodes with something about what you can do as a public to keep pressure on these elected officials and these federal judges up to the United States Supreme Court. So until our next hot take, Court Accountability in Action and Court Accountability Action and Legal AF signing off. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.